So the two of us are, I am an attorney, Rob is in insurance, so about a year ago we started looking into ways that we can help our clients prepare for a breach. And when you think of attorneys in cybersecurity, usually it's after the breach, you know, sending out the notifications, dealing with everyone suing you. We wanted to use our position as the day-to-day counselor with our clients to help them get ready ahead of time so that if they are breached, they don't have to spend as much time with us. So that's kind of my introduction. I'm going to give Rob a second to introduce himself as well.
So like Isaac said, I'm Rob Strachan with Strachan Novak Insurance, located in Twinsburg. So we do a lot of professional liability in the corporate world. So a lot of CPAs, a lot of attorneys, and then on the other side is the cyber liability. Insurance is a dirty word. Everybody hates insurance, but in my eyes, insurance, you have your bottom drawer of your desk, you open it up, and you got hopefully $1 million to pay for issues if they were to happen. So you got to change that mentality on insurance. So after the lawyer, you know, kind of bores you, I'll come in and talk about insurance and bore you a little bit more. So at this point, I'll hand it over to Isaac.
You know, every time I give one of these presentations, people pick on me. It's like people don't like attorneys or something. I don't get it. Anyways, every time when we start a presentation, we like to run through a little bit about the IBM and Poneman Institute breach cost calculator. I'm assuming a decent number of you are already familiar with it. What we're hoping to do today is to give you a little background on an experiment we did with this calculator and show you how some of the key questions in the calculator lead into a discussion on the legal and insurance considerations you should be thinking about when preparing for a breach. So to give you guys some background, several months ago when we gave our first presentation together, we were with a group of entrepreneurs, and these are businesses that range anywhere from a three-man shop to some of the biggest members of some of the biggest banks in the nation. So ahead of time, we sent out a condensed version of the Poneman Institute's calculator and had everyone answer the questions. We had probably about 25 people go through and respond, and these were the questions we asked. You know, very looking at what kind of company you are, primary industry, what kind of information you have, how many precautions you've actually taken from a technology point of view or just structurally, things of that nature. And here's what we found. Most people, when they answered the quiz, had about $100,000 as the average cost for their breach. And the average chance was 10 to 11% in the next 12 months. But what was really interesting was when we did this, 13 of the people that responded had perfect answers. And it's probably because we had people from the banks and industries that have been regulated heavily on these issues for years. And so those 13 people really had perfect. Everything was exactly what you should be doing. The other 12, it was like, have you ever, what do I do? I've never even heard of this before. You mean I'm supposed to be encrypting my emails? And what's a chief security officer, by the way? I'm a little confused. So that's kind of was the big shock to us, was how is either they're perfect or they knew nothing. So here's where we start after we figured out, you know, what issues people need to consider and where they're really sitting, whether or not they've actually taken precautions. From a legal point of view, this is what I worry about every day for my clients before a breach, because this is what's going to determine whether, like Target, they're going to have 100 class actions filed against them in the first 6 months following a breach. So here's the laws. First, you've got state laws, which really is your primary source for breach notifications. Now, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not that's going to be taken over at a federal level, and there have been some bills that have been getting moved forward that would basically overtake the state laws and the breach notifications, but currently that's where you want to look. So if you're breached and you have customers in 20 different states, you have to go to the laws of those 20 different states and see what exactly you should be telling them or what notifications you need to send out. On a federal level, it's currently very industry specific. So some of the different federal statutes do have breach notifications. A lot of them have minimum security requirements. A good example is that if you ever do work with the Department of Defense, you have to have adequate, whatever that means, adequate security measures in place to protect any sensitive information that you receive from them. And then a lot of the federal legislation really regards how you dispose of your information, how long you keep it. It's especially in the area if you ever touch a consumer report, there's a lot regulating how you give those out, when you destroy it, that kind of thing. Currently, we're looking at a possible federal agency that will unify a lot more of these activities, kind of tell us a little bit more about what the overall attitude of the federal regulators is, and that's the Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center. And from the talks after President Obama announced it, they're calling it a hub. So the FTC, the FBI, all the different agencies that currently have a hand in this would be coordinating with this one source so they're trading information. And lastly, from a liability standpoint, obviously you have getting sued. You have all the individuals who lost credit card info because you were breached. You have your breach of contract claims. You know, I'm your best customer and you got breached, so now you owe me for all the trade secrets you just lost. And then credit card issuers, they've been actually one of the biggest litigants in suing places like Target because they want to be paid back for all the cards they had to reissue. So to avoid paying money to all the different agencies and all the different kind of liabilities I showed you, the first question that people need to understand to very crassly break down what you need to do legally is whether or not you're carrying consumer information versus confidential information. And the reason this is important is because it tells you right off the bat whether or not you need to be looking at your contracts with your customers or your vendors in terms of a business that carries trade secrets to determine what sort of standards you need to meet, or if you need to be looking at the laws I was just telling you about. And that is essential from my point of view. If I'm doing due diligence with a company, I need to know immediately how much of these two types of information they have, if they really just fall on one side, because that's going to run the rest of the conversation and tell me what legal standards you need to be following. The other things that really matter, especially if you get breached and you have one of the regulators reviewing what your company did ahead of time to see if they're going to fine you or something along those lines. You've got the things that most cybersecurity audits really should be looking at. You know, how secure is your network? What is your system archaic? Things like that. But then there's some other things that we really like to discuss with our clients. A lot of that is policy-based, employee training, things of that nature. Employee training is probably the number one thing regulators think about when they're looking at companies. Obviously, they're going to check how strong your technology was, how strong your safeguards were. But at the end, the biggest thing is, I mean, come on, you could have the best system in the world, but if you haven't told your employee not to walk into Starbucks with a laptop and then leave it open without being password protected while you go to the bathroom, then your policies don't matter because your employee just lost you probably hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you want some cases about that, I have some pretty funny ones that I've actually seen on that. So the things that lower the breach, because I like not just to tell people what's making it worse, but also what's making it better, having a formal enterprise-wide data protection plan, appointing a CSO. You'd be shocked how many things that, from my point of view, sitting down and writing a basic resolution to appoint a new officer and coming up with those officers' duties, how important that can be after the breach, just because people are analyzing whether or not you thought to do it. Involving management. How many people here are on the management level? How many people have to try to convince management that this is an issue they need to be thinking about more? So a couple of you. The biggest thing that I see issues with is the gap between the people trying to get the company to take cybersecurity measures and the C-suite who says, no, our company isn't really a threat, threatened by this. We're just a mid-sized company. Nobody wants us. So that factor alone, getting management to understand this is a serious issue and getting them involved, can be one of the biggest factors in making your company successful. And then using tools to protect data. I mean, that's more on the IT side, but anyone looking at your company to see whether or not you should be held legally liable is going to spend a long time scrutinizing your IT. And lastly, vendor due diligence, which I have a little bit more on the next slide. So what does vendor due diligence mean, and why does it matter legally? Again, this falls especially in the realm if your company carries trade secrets, anything in that nature. We see it as it goes two ways. You need to know what your customers are telling you to do. And when I read these contracts, I'm trying to think of a good example. I think I recently came across the standard terms and conditions from a company like GE or GM, and I read through what they were requiring from a cybersecurity standpoint. I'm telling you, there were probably 2 pages of requirements that were tucked in different parts of 10 pages of terms and conditions that governed everything you need to be doing with the information that they're giving you. Now, I get a little, I've been doing this for a while now, and I need to sit down and spend some time with that. So when we're talking to our clients, and this is just a small company helping them, I guarantee they signed this agreement because it's a huge contract. They never once looked at the terms and conditions, and now they're being held to an extremely high level of a very high standard for how they're keeping data, and they have no clue that they're not meeting it, which means the second they get breached, they have a lawsuit on their hands. But just as important, what are you passing down to your vendors, okay? So the way business works, this all flows downhill. You get your contract, you have certain parts you can't do, you hire somebody to do it. Well, the person you're hiring, are you passing the standard down to them? What if they're hiring someone? Are they passing the standard down to that person? I'm going to call out Gary for a second here. We did a presentation last fall to a group of manufacturers, and somebody from Harley-Davidson came up to us after, and he said, I've got the best subcontractor in the world. I love him. I know he's keeping my stuff secure, but I know he hires people, and I'm really scared. What do I do? Step 1, audit him, see what he's telling them to do. Step 2, put in your next contract, or the next time you're going for renewal, add a provision that says, by the way, anyone you hire needs to be following the same standards you are. But again, that's all on the legal side, and vendor due diligence can be one of the biggest places you lose. Workplace policies, I just mentioned, employees are probably your biggest risk right now. They're probably going to be where you lose all of your information. So what do? Well, one, you have to have the right policies. You have to figure out what they're doing so that you have to talk to them. First, you need to design a survey, or depending on the size of your company, something to figure out how they're doing work. Are they using the cloud? Are they using Dropbox, even though they're not supposed to be? Don't worry, you're not going to get penalized if you admit you're using Dropbox, but we want to find a better alternative for you. Once you know what they're doing, develop the policies around that. Okay, well, guess what? Here's the cloud service you're going to use from now on, but we'll pay for it. Or here's the new way we're going to remote in from work. We're going to make it easy for you so you can follow it, but please follow it. And then train them. You can come up with the best policies. You can hire all the best things to do, but if you don't spend 1 hour a quarter going through and explaining them the new policies, they probably aren't going to follow it because they won't know it. And you know what the other benefit to doing all this is? If you do get breached, and the FTC, for example, is reviewing what you've done ahead of time, you have a log where you say, all right, well, look, we figured out what they were doing wrong. We came up with new policies. We built in new things. And guess what? We trained them. Here are all our records. And the FTC goes, okay, we're going to lower your fine by like $300,000 because you did that, or whatever amount. So at the end of the day, this is my last slide. I hope I didn't bore you to sleep. I know that was threatened. What do I do? What do I really care about when I'm going through and somebody asks me what can I do to start down the cybersecurity process? I tell them, let's take a look at your contracts. Let's get you a new form for your vendors. Let's review industry standards to see if there's any federal or state or other legislation that can really identify some specific standards you should be following. Review your infrastructure, see if you have somebody that is actually going to, run the ship if you do get breached, so to say. Employee handbook review, employee training, I already discussed that. Then system security. A lot of that, the first recommendation I'm going to have anyone is say, all right, do you have an IT company that you work with regularly? Go find a new one that can conduct an audit and ask them to audit you. Step number one. Then two, talk to me. And by the way, make sure that audit includes a physical review, because people have gotten so caught up in protecting their network that now they're forgetting to lock their front door. And that's not going to matter at all if somebody can just go back 90s style and you've got the guy with the long coat walking in with his briefcase stealing your papers. And then this is what I like to end with. The FTC is currently the biggest regulator right now that's deciding when to go after somebody for post-breach and to levy a fine against them or to take action against them for not being protected. This is their mindset. This is the way they think about reviewing you. This is a constant process. If you did this 3 years ago, you're in the wrong. Just because you've been breached doesn't mean you messed up. Everyone gets breached. But if you haven't been breached, that doesn't mean you're doing it right. And then what you do has to be reasonable in relation to your circumstances. Reasonable is a big legal term that, it basically means you're in the gray area. Well, if your company has 50 people, I don't expect you to be doing what KeyBank has to do to protect itself. If your company has 100 people, I expect you to be doing more than the company that has 50 people. And it also relates to industry and all the factors that we just ran through. And when you keep all that in mind, what you learn is involving your legal counsel can help you shape the precautions that you have to take so that you don't end up doing too much, but also you don't end up not doing enough. So I'm going to hand it off to Rob, who will start talking about the insurance part, and afterwards we're hoping that by running this through on a high level, we can get a good discussion going on what you guys want to know from us.
So everybody still awake? All right. All right, good. So just by a show of hands, how many people know that they have a cyber liability policy in their companies? Okay. How many people know that they have about $500,000 of a slush fund or a rainy day fund to pay for a cyber attack? Pay for, are you hiring? So I just got this article before I came here. Insurance, it's the hot item in the insurance world. In 2013, there was $1 billion of premium in the insurance world. In 2014, there was $2 billion of cyber liability premium spent. Why is that? Because, as everybody knows in this room, there is a ton of hacks going on. Everybody knows the Home Depots, the Targets, all the big ones, but as we all know, there's tens and hundreds of thousands of hacks going on every day. And the small to mid-sized businesses really need to have the policies. So what is cyber liability insurance? So in the world, it's about a fairly new coverage. We've always had general liability, we've always had property insurance, but cyber is new within the last 10 years. And it's almost changing on a monthly basis. There's exclusions coming in, there's endorsements coming out, and the policies are changing on a rapid pace. Not only the policies are changing, but the premiums are too. Depending on sectors, premiums could be going down or premiums going low. Depending on actuarially, the data is so raw that premiums are changing, almost monthly, but absolutely annually. So within the coverages, obviously, no one can read this, but high level, we're going to do, there's first-party coverages and then third-party. First party is yourself, third party is everybody else that's suing you, after a breach, and we'll get into those later. So the question is, who needs cyber liability? Pretty much every company needs cyber liability, whether you have health records of hundreds of millions of people, or you're just taking credit card data, or if you just have employer records. You're going to have some type of breach, and it's going to be, how are we going to pay for this cost? Limits. That depends on what type of coverages you want as a company and what type of limits you have. If you have just employee data, you can have $50,000 to defend yourself, and that's a discussion you can have with your broker. But long and short of it is, it's a personal decision. Regulators are not pushing down cyber liability on a lot of sectors. So you can assume the risk yourself or transfer it with the insurance policy. So, of course, we're all perfect, right? None of our companies are going to get hacked, and we do everything right. But God forbid it happens. Where do you get the coverage? Most people think that there's coverage within their normal property insurance, their normal general liability, or professional liability policies. But fact of the matter is, there really isn't much coverage in those policies at all. More and more now, as exclusions and endorsements are coming on the cyber liability portion, exclusions are coming onto the property and general liability policies as well. Rightfully so. They're designed for bodily injury and property damage. When you have a cyber attack, you're not going to have bodily injury or property damage. It's really going to just be financial loss, and that's more of an errors and omissions coverage, and that's where the cyber liability policies come into play. So, long and short of it is, there is no coverage, and that's why you need a cyber policy. This is where we're going to get into the first party and third party expenses. First party, like I said, it's going to be on yourself. It's going to be data notification, business income. So business income is not really you don't think of business income when you think of a cyber attack. But think about what happens if your company gets shook up and turned upside down. You're going to hire in forensics teams. You're going to have to restore your data. How long is that going to take in order to get up and running with full head of steam like you were before that attack? It's going to take weeks, months, 2-3 months, who knows? But that loss of income, you got to pay key people, salaries, you've got mortgage, you've got vendors you're going to have to pay off, and you're going to have to hire other companies to take that load that you are supposed to be doing. So where's that money come from? That's where the business income loss coverage comes into play. Third party is more or less going to be people suing you, the notification, and then the monitoring. So as Isaac said earlier with the Poneman Institute, every record you have, on average, is about $200 per record. So that's, depending on industry, it's going to be credit card monitoring for a year, 2, maybe even 3 years for people that were breached. You have to at least offer it to them. So I won't get into a lot of the other expenses, but high level, those are the first and third party expenses. So not every policy is the same. We always say in insurance, you buy a $4.99 steak buffet, you got to expect to have a $4.99 steak. Cheapest is not always the best, but also having the most expensive policy out there is not the best. So you really need every policy, it's not a cookie cutter policy like your home and your auto. Every company has certain specific risks and certain specific liability risks that specific to each company. So some high-level things in terms of some common themes in terms of policies that you're going to want to look at are information by an employee, a negligent employee, a rogue employee. Is that going to be excluded or included into your cyber policy? Same thing, negligent release of information. Maybe it was an accident. Is that covered? Who knows? So another thing on the insurance policies, we always say the first paragraph in insurance policies is, don't worry, you're covered. You're covered for everything. That next paragraph and the next 50 pages behind it says except. And the devils are in the details. So go to the next slide there. Some common exclusions is if you're not increasing or you're not keeping up with your database or your firewalls or all your protection, a lot of companies have almost an e-break clause. If you're not doing the things that you're supposed to do, as Isaac said before, they can say, you know what, we're not paying the claim, we're out. So that's where you're going to want those audits, the security audits. You're going to want to stay on top. And I'm sure everybody, I'm preaching to the choir with this crowd, but so that's long the short of it with exclusions. The devils are in the details, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions during the Q&A time, but we'll get to more exclusions. So, recommendations for buying cyber liability. Know what you have, know what you don't have, and then know what you need. So, pretty broad, but essentially, not, as I said, the cookie cutter policies are, a thing of the past. You can have a business owner's policy that gives you a little bit of coverage in it, and people say, I'm covered. But more times than not, a $500,000 policy, $1 million policy is not going to cut it for a lot of different companies. Depending on your database, in terms of how many people you have, it depends on how bad the claim is. Understanding the policy triggers. What needs to happen in terms of what is a trigger? What is an event? What is a data breach? Is it just a internet hack? Is it, some policies just define a paper, so that could be a breach. And then the retroactive coverage is huge with insurance policies nowadays. So pre-having a cyber liability policy, anything prior to that, say it's a festering problem. If it's deemed by the forensic team of the claims adjusters with an insurance policy that it was there before you had a policy, they're going to pull that e-brake and put their hands up and say, we're out. So you really want to make sure you have a prior existing acts policy. And then obviously the exclusions, sublimits. Sublimits is essentially, we'll give you $1 million a bucket of money, but we're only going to give you $25,000 of notification. So to pay for all the postage, printing, everything like that. So you really need to look in your policy. They look sexy, they look like you have a lot of coverage, but you really need to make sure what's in the pages behind. So what do the underwriters look for when you're applying for an insurance policy? They're looking for everything that Isaac said. What do you have? What have you done? What are you doing? And what is going to happen after a loss? Do you have a CIA designated? Do you have a plan of action? And a lot of companies nowadays, if you apply for a policy, they're going to help you get to that point as well. One of our companies we represent, actually, they give you a pen test. They go and do a cyber audit. They help you get from A to M. Not really to Z. That's, you have to have a little bit of skin in the game, but they want you to be, minimize your risk as a client. But the things that they're looking for, the applications. How many people have filled out a cyber liability application? Looked at. Pretty extensive. I'm not really an IT person. I deal with the applications every day. Most of the questions go over my head. So you guys would probably rattle them off, but it's pretty impressive in terms of how down and dirty they get within what each company does. So how much does it cost? I always get this question. So I actually did recent accounts we wrote. A accounting firm that had 620 records. They wanted a $300,000 limit. Was only $900 for the year. We had a telemarketing firm for health insurance companies. They had 18 million revenue. They had They wanted a 10 million limit, and it was $65,000 in premium. A zoo, 13 million in revenue, 10,000 in records. $1 million limit, and it was about $4,000 in premium. A candy manufacturer, 90 million in revenue, 5,000 records, and it was $9,200 in premium. So again, the premiums aren't as bad as they used to be, and they're getting lower because actuarially they're honing in on what they want to exclude, essentially. So it's not as bad as it used to, and I think they're going to continue to get more finite in terms of the premium. So I think that's it. So the questions, again, we did this about a month ago, and we did have quite a few questions, so we wanted to leave enough time for people to rattle off questions.
What percentage of claims are actually paid out? How does the claim process work?
Yeah, so the question was, what percentage of claims are actually paid out? I would say 90% of claims are actually paid out. Personally, in my situation, I've never had a claim not paid out because it's the old adage: good information in, good information out. But the problem is that insurance has a bad rap. Is you don't know about the exclusions. You don't read policies. So people buy an auto insurance policy online or home insurance for not knowing what it is, and then they expect everything to be covered. So you got to really know what the exclusions are. There was another. Yeah.
In terms of third parties, vendors, business partners, etc., there's a lot of due diligence that takes place. In terms of insurance and specifically cyber liability insurance, should we be specifically evaluating third parties to make sure that they not only have standard insurance but now also cyber liability policies?
It's a cross section of these two facets, but yeah, if depending what your industry is, so you can have a policy that will obviously cover you as an entity, but say you have a claim, right, and it leaks down to your vendor, kind of like Target. The way Target, I believe it was Target, was hacked was through one of their vendors. So Target is going to bear the initial brunt, the primary. But what's going to happen is their company that covered that loss is going to subrogate down to the vendor. And that company is essentially going to go out of business because they're going to go bankrupt to pay off probably not even 25% of what that claim was. So is it good, proper due diligence? Absolutely. And the contracts would probably.
So I'm negotiating this right now, all right? And it's with a vendor that doesn't understand how this could ever be an issue, how they could ever have information, but they're the security system. Okay, so I'm telling them, why do we need this insurance? Why do we need this? Why do we need that? Because at the end of the day, even if my guys get their insurance is going to want to recover from somebody else's insurance. So number one, you're making your insurance happy. And number two, say my guy, there is a breach and it's related to this vendor, and my guy's insurance doesn't cover all of it, or something else, or we just plain feel we should be going after them for everything. We want to know that our vendor has the financial backing to do it, because it's like what you were saying earlier. Do you have $500,000 sitting in your desk drawer to self-insure? A better question, do the people that you contract with have $500,000 sitting in their drawer so that if you have to go after them, they can actually pay you? Because let me tell you, I'm mostly on the corporate side, but we have a lot of litigators, and you can have the best case in the world, but that doesn't mean anything if the company or person you're suing doesn't have anything to give you.
So for non-financial services companies or non-long-term regulated companies or industries, right, where's this from a maturity spectrum? So if we have hundreds of third parties that potentially have some hand in sensitive data, I'm certain that as we start having those conversations, they're going to say, what? What's cyber liability insurance?
Right.
Do you have any insight into sort of what the maturity scale is?
I just read an article regarding that specific question. They say in 10 years, which doesn't help you at this point, but in 10 years, in a normal insurance policy, you have a general liability, you've got property, you've got auto. So there's a three-legged stool. They said in 10 years, the fourth leg is going to be cyber, and it's going to be pushed down from the regulars down. So in a normal insurance policy, it's just going to be expected to be there. So Again, it's a very fresh and raw product. 10 years in an insurance world is very, very new. So it's in its infancy. But I think the devil is in the contracts that you can push down to your vendors regarding litigation going back to them. So as Isaac was saying, if you can tell them you should, or we suggest, or I don't know, he can probably tell you better, but as long as you have a policy to defend yourself, and then they can subrogate back, you have to look for number one. So cover yourself and allow your insurance company to try to subrogate back to your vendors, or the vendor who was at fault. I don't know if that answers your question, but no?
It does answer the question, but
Yeah.
I guess where it gets a little fuzzy is the general prevailing wisdom is that your third parties, you're never really shifting that responsibility to your third parties. That you really always are maintaining ownership for the risk. Whether it's written in the contract or they have the policies, there's still sort of that idea that you're never really moving the risk, but you still have the accountability for it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the answer to that is yes and no. There's a certain extent to which anything you put in your standard form that you give to vendors, they, like I said before, they're going to be so excited to work with you, they're probably not going to read half of it. But from the lawyer's point of view, that doesn't mean that they're not liable. And the main thing you have to think is prevailing wisdom, or whether or not you still have skin in the game or anything, you want to do everything you can to bring somebody else into it to lower your costs, because these breaches are crippling. So maybe it's worth having the conversation with them. We had one case where the company said, look, these are the standards we plan to hold you to. And he'd worked with them before, and he said, I can't meet all of those, but here's what I can do. And they worked it out. They found something in between, and it became a negotiating point. And this is where it's really coming out, is it's a new negotiating point for the contracts. And yes, there are going to be vendors or people you're contracting with that don't read what the contract you hand them, but that's kind of like beware of what you don't read.
Get on the selling business as well.
Oh, and one particular area where this is really important is if you're selling your business. Okay, so what's happening with negotiating these contracts is whether or not you've taken precautions is becoming like the new environmental liability for a merger. All right, so 10 years ago, that was the hot topic. All the lawyers trying to find environmental issues with your company so they could drive down the purchase price or just really bend you over backwards on the contract. Well, this is what cyber is becoming. In the IT industry, that has been that issue for 3 or 4 years now. But we're starting to see increased activities on the due diligence side on what they're asking to see when they're buying your company for the same reason.
So let's say, for instance, you have a third-party vendor, and you're going to have a contract with them, and you ask them, hey, do you have some sort of cyber insurance? Are you doing the right things? Let's say they got breached, and they don't just have 1 or 2 customers, but they have 50 to 100 customers.
Mm-hmm.
They have a policy for $1 million. How does that work?
So you're assuming your data is compromised as well. So again, you're going to go after number one. So your policy is going to act first. If you don't have a policy, you're going to have to take care of your own house. That $1 million, these guys are all going after that $1 million, and it's going to take 5 to 10 years to divvy up that $1 million, and that company is going to be gone. I mean, they're going to liquidate that company because there's not a...
So from that perspective, what's the incentive for vendors to have that type of insurance if he as a customer is not going to see that money ever?
It's a good question. I mean, it depends if you want to liquidate a company and go to a business. So if I'm talking to one of those vendors, what's your reputation worth? What's your business worth? And if you have a lot of companies or a lot of people, for example, somebody owns, say, 50 rental properties. I say, listen, you really should have insurance on these things. I don't need insurance because it's a shell company. If something happens, I get sued, I'll just close down that corporation, open up a new LLC, and I'll continue on. So talking to the vendor or the sole guy that, you know, doesn't have the policy, what's your reputation worth? You know, do you have integrity?
Well, I think also what we're missing here is the risk to your business based on how critical that third party is to your core business.
Right.
So if you know that that third party is critical to your business, you have to make sure that they're protected as part of your risk assessment for your business.
Did everybody hear that? So essentially, how much is that vendor worth to you as a company? And how much are you worth to that vendor? So it's a symbiotic relationship. If he's really worth it, or if you're worth it for him to get a policy and you push down to him, they'll do it. That's essentially what you're saying.
So that touches on an important point, because we're, especially me, you know, the legal mindset is protect my client, and that's very much a mindset that doesn't acknowledge that in a lot of ways this is a very collaborative process. So we'll talk about what Key Bank is doing. I think this is a great example. Banks have also started giving out these questionnaires to their clients on what you're doing. But what Key Bank has also started doing is they have a program where these smaller businesses that really don't understand the first steps, well, these are important customers to them. So they say, all right, come in for 2 hours. We're going to walk you through. The first hour, you're going to be scared. You're going to be like, this is way too much for me to do. Then by the end of the second hour, we're going to show you how this isn't so bad. All right, so yes, there's some extent where the vendors really aren't going to pay attention to what you're saying, or this might be a real issue for them, but keep in mind that part of this collaborative process is also trying to help them protect themselves so that you get to keep using them and they get to keep having other customers too. This isn't all doom and gloom, hopefully.
Question on, I guess, part of the underwriting and also, you know, when the insurance is paying out, a claim has been made.
Right.
I mean, in property, you've got, you know, you've got building code and you've got, you know, legal, lots of laws and things that have been built up over time to protect part of the assets that are going on.
Right.
Well, in not all industries do you have that sort of regulation put in place to protect digital assets. At what line is that best practice or due diligence? Are you guys are you able to kind of lie that in the ground?
In the event of a claim, like
Yeah.
what is that stuff worth? Is essentially
It's more like have you kept your house in order? You know,
right.
I may have kept my house in order for 1990 standards, but not
Right.
2010.
Right. So in the underwriting or the application process, they ask you, you know, and they ask you, what are you doing? What have you done? What systems do you have in place? And then at renewal, because again, this is so new, you have not as an extensive application process, but at renewal, you're going to have, what have you done? What are you doing? What are you continuing to do? If you have a claim and they go in, and companies have those forensics teams too, because you know they don't want to pay out on every claim. If they come in and say, wait a minute, your application in 2014, October 2014, said you did X, Y, and Z, you know, we don't see that in your system.
I mean, let's take back a target. You know, you've deployed a great product that's supposed to mitigate the risk that was originally of concern,
right?
But it wasn't properly taken care of and managed effectively, and you didn't hit the right red light.
Right. So in terms of vetting your vendors and making sure that they have, I'm sorry, I must be missing
I'm just wondering, like, if on the claims adjuster,
right,
looking at that, you say, you didn't perform these. At what point can you say, well, there was negligence here versus, you did have your affairs in order?
Right. So the black and white, is there any gray?
You talk to CISOs, and they're not, they
right.
may not be directly involved in full operations of each process.
Right.
For a security operation, but they know that general, hey, we've got a SIM, or hey, we've hired this vendor
right.
to try and take care of it. But there's gaps.
Yeah, and again, no one's perfect, and that's why you have insurance policies, and that's how there's claims, right? Is that essentially what you're saying?
I mean,
so,
I guess so.
I must be missing, but essentially.
I'm just not understanding the fuzziness in that. The two
So you have a claim, and I'm telling you this because I've dealt with this on the property side, okay? So I think this will be a good example. You come in, you've had a storm come through. Your roof got torn off, right? And you present the claim to your insurance, and they go, all right, well, we'll cover these two things, these two pieces of damage. But damage 3, you know, that related to some water damage that had been occurring over time because you didn't really keep up part of your roof, so we're not paying that, right? So you go out and you hire your lawyer, and now your lawyer negotiates for 2 months with your insurance company. You fall somewhere in the middle. These guys, what they're doing is they're looking for ways to not pay you. That's why you have the 50 exclusions at the end of your policy. And that's why, in part, it becomes a negotiation. You can do it, you know, you can have your insurance, the guy that got you the insurance policy, assuming it's not from that agency, do it. You know, it's a negotiation process, and you are going to be looked at. Does that answer it?
So, if the reason for having cyber insurance is to help me when I have a problem, how fair is it for you to then come in and say, oh, well, you had a problem, so we're not going to cover you? It kind of defeats the purpose of pursuing the coverage in the first place. If he doesn't want to pay you. Well, yeah, so I know you're not going to want to pay me.
Right.
So why should I even bother paying you to begin with?
Well, 80 to 90% of contracts are very clear. And this is why insurance gets a bad rap. Contracts are very clear. You know, there's an agreement. You pay premium, we'll pay out on a claim. And the contracts are clear saying, we will pay for this, we won't pay for this. If this happens, you will get X.
Is there sort of a parallel to life insurance? Like you get a physical exam and there's a certain age. Don't you do some of that evaluation up front to determine
Up front annually.
Yeah. And how much coverage you get based on?
Yeah, so policies pay out. You know, I think everybody's getting stuck in the old adage of insurance companies are going to take my money and never pay out. They pay out. They pay out probably more than people realize. In the home and auto world, for every $1 they bring in for the last 5 years, they paid out $1.14. They make money on their investments. So, and the vetting. So every renewal, you tell them what you're doing. You tell them, and if you're a bad risk, they're not going to get you. They're not going to bring you on, because why would they be adversely selected to bring you on and know that you're going to have a claim? So there are high-risk insurance companies. If you're not doing that, you can